This is Come Home America with Nick Hancock, and I have Jose Nino as my guest today. Now, Jose, this podcast, I aim to narrate and navigate the twin crises of order and identity in America. And, our podcast that we have together is called Order and Liberty. So, very related. So, I think we're going to have some overlap a little bit on what is covered in our podcast and what I just regularly cover here on Come Home America. But I really appreciate you coming on here because I want to, get into specifically your perspective on things that's just slightly different from mine. Maybe some different priority. The priorities are set maybe a little differently, but that's why I love doing our show because I learn a lot from your takes. So let me introduce you to the folks, and then I'll let you speak up finally. But you can see Jose, his work at josealnino.com. That's Jose Al Nino is how you would spell it.com. If you go to josenino.com, you'll get something wildly different, and you don't want that. You don't want that. josealnino.com. And, he's the author of 2 ebooks, great ebooks. And there's the 10 myths of gun control. And you have to forgive me because I had you on my screen here and then I took you off. So the other one is about Venezuela and explaining that in a way that's not like just pure Fox Newsian kind of explaining what happened to Venezuela, but really going hard on the history and the culture there. And so, Jose, forgive me for butchering the introduction. I thought I had your page up and I lost it, but yeah. So guns, Venezuela, globalism. Tell the folks like some of the work that you focus on, and about your Patreon and your Subscribe Star.
Well, as you mentioned, Nick, first off, thank you for having me on. I have authored 2 ebook guides on gun control in Venezuela. The latter is part of my biography because I was originally born there, and I've generally kept tabs on the political situation there for a while. I'm a history major, so I like to analyze stuff from a broad historical perspective, and that book was written specifically for people that want to know about why Venezuela collapsed. And I go into a lot of historical reasons. Unlike the typical analysis you see from Fox News or even MSNBC, the problems of Venezuela predate Hugo Chavez, the famous strongman that brought about the radical changes of the past 20 years in the country. And I especially wrote it for people that are into central banking and how that destroys the money, because I think it is a textbook example of it. And I go into how Venezuelan millennials have never seen a year of single digit inflation and how this problem is multi-generational. And this book was mostly a concise overview of a lot of my other works that I've done at the Mises Institute and other websites, along with original thoughts about Venezuela. So I go into that. I don't really cover Venezuela much anymore because I'm more focused on US politics and other stuff. But that was one of my first works. And the gun control guide was just based off my experience in the gun lobby when I worked as a copywriter and lobbyist for the National Association for Gun Rights. And there I learned the importance of not only the Second Amendment, but also grassroots activism, because Second Amendment activism, for whatever flaws it's had, it's one of the few bright spots that the right has had in the last 30 years because of the fact that a lot of gun lobbies, especially at the grassroots level, they use tactics that actually win. And it's been shown with regards to the constitutional carry movement, which before 2004, only 2 states had it, Vermont and Alaska. And then since Arizona got the legislation passed in 2010, it's turned into one of the fastest growing pro-liberty Second Amendment measures that is being passed across the nation, and it continues to have states introduce the legislation such as Tennessee, Louisiana, among others. And if you're in a red state, the likelihood of it passing is much higher. So I wrote that book to prep people on some of the most common myths they'll hear about gun rights so that they can be on point and be ready to just dismantle the nonsense that's being spewed on a daily basis.
Well, let's stick with the gun issue then, because I think it's about so much more than just the individual right to own a gun, which is supremely important. I mean, your work at the Mises Institute is very good on this issue. I mean, your latest there is the right to own a gun isn't just for Americans, and that's a great take and a great article. But what I try to find out on this show is really the quality of communities and what type of community and how many of them will be able to withstand the coming tests on the country and on the state of order and identity and liberty in the country. And so where guns come into this, I think it's that constitutional carry that you talked about. It's a culture around it that's certainly spreading or was already in place and really just spread politically. But also, we've seen in the last year roughly 5 million new gun owners. And just, I think it's basically anecdotal, but I think it's enough anecdotal evidence from a variety of different gun salesmen out there and gun shop owners that a lot of those 5 million new gun owners are, different demographics than the traditional picture of a gun owner in America. And so perhaps 40% are women, and a sizable portion of that group are Black women. Just these are sort of anecdotal, but they tend to make sense to me, just in terms of the people who perceive that they need to protect their families and are coming under new threats to the country, most of the time through these riots and arson attacks and other Black Lives Matter related activities. And so, what do you think about the state of community of gun owners in America? I mean, is the gun lobby, the major gun lobby that we think of, the NRA, is closely tied to manufacturers? But what is the citizen lobby like? What is the citizen lobby for gun rights like? And what can that tell us about the state of, is it too impossible to read too much into this? I mean, about the state of community in the country, because the way I see it is, if we have a lot of new gun owners coming onto the scene, necessarily those people need to be trained. Those people need to gain experience and find someone they trust who they can, talk to about their new firearm. So to me, it's a sign, a good sign going forward. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually do believe that pro Second Amendment organizations and also just generic gun clubs are some of the last vestiges of civil society left in the US, because the US has become more atomized over time and community bonds have broken. And I think that's one of the few institutions left to provide some form of social cohesion in America. To the new gun owners, it's actually part of a ongoing trend called gun culture 2.0. Forget the professor's name, but he talks about how it's just this new development that has occurred in the last 2 decades where you're seeing more minorities, LGBT groups, women, and other segments of the American population that are generally not associated with gun ownership starting to embrace gun ownership and the carry of firearms in general. And it's great news because it just shows that there is a very organic political culture in the US that is pro gun and it cuts across partisan, religious, and ethnic lines. It's also a really good sign that there's going to be very strong resistance to zealous gun control measures that the federal government tries to implement.
Yeah, I was just looking up gun culture 2.0. I haven't heard that term before, but I just found a blog referring to it, and they talked about philosopher Baruch Spinoza. So maybe that name rings a bell. But yeah, I think like we need to look for avenues to not to have some Pollyanna rose-colored vision of the future. I think there's some divides that just won't be bridged. Today Rush Limbaugh, or it was yesterday, I believe, Rush Limbaugh on his show was talking about the trajectory of the country toward secession. And ironically enough, one of the first voices on the Rush Limbaugh show talking about secession in a positive way was the late great Walter E. Williams. So, getting back to the gun culture point, maybe we can look for some political realignment around the gun issue. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, as any Democrat would be, were very loud and boisterous about their anti-gun positions in the primary, and I didn't hear a whole lot about it in the general. A little bit we did, but I don't see an appetite for gun control in the future. I mean, you probably will see executive orders to some degree, but I think the fact that you have this gun culture 2.0, the non-traditional gun owners, maybe people can see past other differences if they find common ground in self-preservation and protection for their families and their communities. So definitely something to explore. I think that could be what in previous years would have been an unpredictable avenue for some political realignment around gun culture. So that would be nice. On the other hand, now maybe that just ramps up the the sort of soft, cold civil war that we have going on, and people will actually have guns pointed at each other more than they already have in the protests that we've seen in 2020. So we'll see. Maybe that's sort of a Pollyanna vision of mine, that I would think that people's gun ownership would sort of form them and help them understand they're part of a free society. Maybe they won't get that, right? Your thoughts on any of that, Jose?
I think that gridlock is really good in the US, which means that due to a lot of the divisions in the US, there will not be a coherent strategy on the federal government's part to disarm people. And I see polarization as an opportunity for us to push for radical decentralization and other forms of localism that keep the federal government in check. I'm not one of those people that obsesses over unity and other cliches of that nature. While there is always a need for cautious optimism and prudence, I do not see whatsoever anything that shows that we're doomed for now. If anything, we have plenty of opportunities to tap into for spreading our message and bringing about sensible policies at the local and state level.
Right on. Yeah, and for me, it's like my favorite thing in the world is decentralization, and the country. A bad word, I guess, is balkanizing. But I think like when I hear Rush Limbaugh talk about secession, and I hear like folks moving towards this discussion as like a mainstream conversation. I get so excited about that. I almost want to sort of revert back and be like, well, where can we find common ground again, and where can we work this out? And so I guess that just remains to be seen. But a very interesting development that you have 5 million new gun owners in the country, and I really do hope that what comes along with gun ownership is a sense of a sense of, rights that you have to protect, that you have to exercise in order to protect, and like in the service of your community or in the service of protecting your household and your family. And so I would like to think that even if various communities around the United States can't see eye to eye politically, perhaps as they grow, we have a more polite society, right? The armed society is the polite society. So I was just looking up also, if you had written anything regarding Walter Williams, the economist who just died less than 2 weeks ago, maybe just a week ago. And Walter Williams, he was 84, a fantastic liberty voice, and a professor of economics, a great one at that. And so he was a substitute host on the Rush Limbaugh show, is the way a lot of people heard him, and he talked about secession in a positive light going back over a decade ago, I believe. And so to see him, leave this world at the same time that secession is being brought up in a positive light, it's quite interesting times. And I wish we had his voice there to offer some historical context for folks. And I see that you had mentioned Walter Williams in an article from less than a year ago, almost a year ago, at the Advocates for Self-Government. That website is not as active as it used to be, but that's on them. And so you were talking about Walter Williams offering a sobering perspective on what might be in store for Virginia gun owners in the 2020 session of the state legislature. After riding a successful 2019 election cycle, which saw Democrats take both chambers of the Virginia General Assembly, Governor Ralph Northam is hoping to capitalize on this new power by passing broad-based gun control legislation. And what we saw there was the gun control issue really bleed into this question of secession or some sort of breakaway movements, if not seceding from the U.S. nation, then seceding your counties out of the state and moving and uniting with another state, which is a part of American history as well. So I thought it was interesting that we could bring Walter Williams into this discussion. So while I'm on that, Jose, to shift gears a little bit, I want to get your takes on secession and decentralization like that, because you call yourself a nationalist. So where does secession and decentralization fall into that? And then beyond that, can you just talk about some of the thought leaders or voices, thinkers that helped influence your thinking either over the last year or in years prior?
Well, I want to touch on Walter Williams, which was a huge loss for anyone that believes in economic freedom and decentralized government. He was a giant in the field and one of the best proponents of our ideas. He had a superhuman ability to communicate his concepts in a manner that the everyday person could easily digest. His loss will be tremendous, and he's served as an inspiration for many people. I actually wrote a piece commemorating him for Liberty Conservative News.
Oh, but I missed that.
Yeah, it actually
go ahead.
Came, I think yesterday though, but yes, his loss was tremendous. However, I think his ideas on secession will continue to be relevant, and I think they may have played a role in Rush Limbaugh's change of opinion on the issue. And it's great that Rush Limbaugh is talking about this. We need more people talking about secession and decentralization now more than ever, because this is the perfect opportunity to bring these ideas forward. As for nationalism goes, I'm a nationalist in juxtaposition to the concept of global governance, which a lot of neoliberals and establishment economists and political science push for these days. They want to create kind of a facsimile of an EU superstate or something even bigger, so that we could have just one governing body that micromanages the lives of billions of people, which is a pipe dream, but people believe in that kind of fantasy. So I'm a nationalist in that sense. I'm more partial to regionalism and localism, though. I think that the U.S. is just like way too big, It's got so many different types of groups already based on ethnic and religious lines and also regional lines that it's becoming much more cumbersome to govern it. And I think that the best kind of government at this point would be a more state or local based government that has just much more autonomy at the end of the day.
Well, very good. I'm glad you set that straight, and I knew that was your position, but it has to be clarified for folks because, I think in Trump's idea of nationalism, and you can only know, insofar as you want to, try and read his mind when he talked about these things, but what came out of this, you like another blog website that you write for, American Greatness, right? And this sort of greatness, this bigness, Donald Trump might say American bigness, but that sort of take on nationalism is, in many ways counterintuitive to a decentralist, more regionalist, localist position. But actually, I don't see a contradiction in any of the statements you just made, because you and I have both read Nations by Consent by Murray Rothbard. And I think it's healthy to, be in a sort of big tent movement and be comfortable with the word nationalist. But some folks are gonna take nationalist to be, they want to run the lives of everyone in the Pacific Northwest and California, rural or urban. And the same with New York. They want to say, you know what, New York, you are part and parcel of the nation of the United States, and that doesn't really have to be a a position of a nationalist, in a certain sense. I mean, what you want is an authentic nation. A nation isn't just a big blob on a map and like something big and impressive looking on a map. It really is the people and the interests and the traditions at whatever level that provides social cohesion. The local, the regional, and you expand out from there. So I still want to see the United States remain one nation in a sense, but it's just not a nation anymore. Patrick Buchanan recognizes this in very convincing detail over the years, and I know that you kind of have the same thoughts regarding that. So and that's really the point of Come Home America. My podcast is like, if I'm saying America, come home, where is that home, and how, where does it start and where does it end? I think we're going to find out in the years to come. It could look very different than what we grew up with. So I do want to point folks to libertyconservativenews.com. If you go there fast enough, Jose's on the front page right now, but a great write-up on Walter Williams' death was a major loss for free market economics. And he was a bulwark against the racialist left, as Jose writes. And so yeah, Jose, I really appreciate you coming on. I don't want to take up a whole lot of your time, but maybe we could just sort of wrap up again on what your focal point is going to be in 2021. Are you going to follow the gun rights issue? Is your interest more in the Great Reset and COVID-19? Or are there things on the horizon? The Federal Reserve and gold and economics. What is the issue or a couple of issues that you're looking forward to in 2021, either for good or bad?
More than likely, I'm going to be focusing on foreign policy, central banking, gun rights, obviously, with some populist issues like immigration as well, that kind of focus, and really not go beyond that. Those are been some of the issues I've held from the start. I got into politics mostly due to the immigration and foreign policy issues. I've been a Buchananite at heart since almost the beginning. Ron Paul and Pat Buchanan have been my main political inspirations. And I'd say, as of late, the past 5 years, people like Paul Gottfried have also really inspired me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've been reading more of Chronicles magazine, and so yeah, you get Paul Gottfried, you get Pedro Gonzalez, a lot of good voices there, and yeah, I think that the paleo conservative movement, and even, I like the paleo libertarian label still. So, I think there is actual potential there for us. And let's close. We haven't hit like half an hour yet, so we got a little bit of time. What if I just ask you to speak on the issue of immigration, if you could give sort of your elevator pitch on the immigration issue, because so many libertarians are, and even many conservatives may not have the same position that you hold, and yet your position is quite consistent with promoting a decentralist and free society. So you're an immigrant, you're born in Venezuela, but you would like to see at least a moratorium on immigration, essentially closed borders for some amount of time. Is that correct?
Yes, I fully favor a multi-decade immigration moratorium similar to the one of the 1920s up until the 1960s.
Right on. Yeah. And so I would love to see more writings on that. That's definitely a position that I've come around to. Reading essays like Nations by Consent by Rothbard, and going over Mises again, and really hearing all of the arguments, but also just witnessing what's happening in real time outside our windows. So, we can see the impact. And like we've said, we want a nation. It's good to have a nation, and it doesn't necessarily mean some grand, centrally planned behemoth of a nation that a lot of folks might refer to, for better or worse. But it does have to be something authentic that brings people together, that serves a common good. And I think that there's value in that, and people want to say that individuals are just like all just all atomistic individuals with blank slates, and you can be whatever you want. There's no attachments, there's no real community besides what anyone voluntarily feels like deciding to have at any given moment. I just don't believe in that. I really feel like we're born into bonds, we're born into traditions, and there's ways to change those things. There's way to make change in society, but to think that you're going to radically overhaul something ingrained in human nature it should not be a libertarian position. But we get into immigration on our podcast, Order and Liberty. So folks should definitely go check that out. And Jose, I'm going to have you back on this show at some point. And there's a lot to get into as we get into the news of 2021 for sure. But until then, I do want to wish you a blessed Advent and a Merry Christmas. And thank you so much for coming on Come Home America with Nick Hancock.
Thank you so much, Nick. It was a pleasure talking as always.
Right on. And folks, please do go to josealnino.com. And I highly recommend his newsletter. I read it. It comes in my email inbox every few days or so, maybe once a week. But I always open it. And great little pieces of advice in there to really keep your eyes on the prize in terms of becoming politically active, and how to interpret the news as it comes in. So with that, Jose, why don't you mention again your Patreon, and I believe your Subscribe Star as well, just where folks can get the most out of what you're producing. I know you said at the beginning of the show, but go ahead and plug away again.
On Patreon and Subscribestar, you can have access to the NIÑO file. That's my premium newsletter on political strategy. This is for winners, for people who want to make a difference in politics. I share my insights based on my decade of experience in politics on what works and what doesn't. And if you want to start a political organization or be involved in politics and have an immediate impact, this is the newsletter for you. Subscribe at the NIÑO file at Patreon or Subscribestar.
Well, excellent. All right, folks, this has been episode 13 of Come Home America with Nick Hancock. I really appreciate you tuning in, and please share, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Check out my newsletter. It's a great supplement to this show at nickhancock.com. Or nickhancock.com is fine, and also nickhancock.substack.com. Again, I really appreciate you guys, all my new subscribers. It's really helping me in getting encouraged to do more of these shows, and they will be coming out at least once a week. So stay tuned. God bless. We'll see you in the next one.